First, you remember the higher mathematics section, when you differentiate a function with respect to time, ds over dt, and it's believed that time is an invariable parameter. And all mathematics is based on this, and I must say that probably most of physics. Around 1950, academician Kozyrev suggested that time can be a variable parameter. That is, it can either be stretched, i.e. can be slowed down, or accelerated. Well, I myself have twice faced the fact when time can be greatly stretched, slowed down. Here is the shortest episode. The detonation speed of TNT explosives is about 8 kilometers per second. It's quite a lot. So, we were attacking to the right bank of Veliki River, to the north of Pskov. We wanted to throw the Germans into the river. We had a few tanks back then, 5 kV tanks in total. As for the artillery, we had only 3 short-barreled howitzers. They could not do any preparation. Therefore, our tanks perished there. Including our tank, it was destroyed, partially burned down. The designer of the Kirovsky plant, Kotin, was a very knowledgeable man. He created a KV tank that did not want to burn. It was very difficult to make it burn. I was very lucky that I was in a KV tank. We went on the attack at an incline of 15 degrees. The hardest thing in an attack is to go through a neutral position. Everyone is hitting you, and you are waiting to see if they will kill you or not. But when you burst into the location, real work begins there. Nothing is scary there. Everything is safe. You are the master there as long as you are alive. We were 150 meters away from the German tanks buried in the ground. There were tigers and panthers buried there. A KVS tank was in front of us. Its speed was 50 kilometers per hour. And we did our best, 40 kilometers per hour. The KVS pulled away. We caught up with it anyway. We poured fuel with the rail into the engine. The engine was moaning. I thought it would fall apart. The tigers hit us point blank from 100 meters. The KV has a vulnerable part. This is a mask, such a cylinder from which a gun sticks out, which carries out vertical aiming. This mask has only 40 millimeters of armor. It can't be otherwise, because there must be a balance so the gun does not outweigh. The Germans knew this, and they did not hit the front where the armor was 90 millimeters, which could not be pierced. But they hit the mask. 2 or 3 shells hit our mask. We lost control over the gun. The company commander, who was with us in the tank, was seriously wounded in the head. On the turret there were 2 commander's periscopes. The commander had been looking at the battlefield through them. He had been giving commands. We'd been going downhill, and the Germans could not immediately hit us, either in the mask or in the turret. All the shells had been flying over the top. One of the shells hit the periscope of the company commander, and steel panels smashed his head. Blood was streaming. His program of behavior was already in his brain beforehand. When he felt a blow, a contusion, he opened the hatch and jumped out. He was supposed to run back to the starting positions, but he ran together with the tank forward towards the Germans. The gun commander saw that the company commander was running towards the Germans. He jumped out, caught up with him. This all happened on the move at 40 kilometers per hour, turned him, pushed him, and the company commander ran to the starting positions. And Kostya, the commander of the gun, this is Kostya, jumped on the tank again on the move, and we continued to race forward. When the German gunner realized that it was necessary to lower the sight, he lowered it, hit the mask, the gun fell into the tank commander was crushed. The gun weighs 1.5 tons, and there were 3 of us left in the tank. Kostya gave the command, "Vovka, jump!" That's to me. I opened the hatch, jumped out immediately. The mechanic driver also tried to jump out after me. Well, there are 3 types of nervous system: phlegmatic, sanguine, choleric. Choleric people have the fastest reaction, but they get tired quickly. Sanguine people have a balanced type of nervous system. The phlegmatic people are somewhat slow-paced guys. The driver mechanic, Leonya Shevchenko, was a phlegmatic guy. A handsome man he was. 23 years old, women could not take their eyes off him. When we came to a village, they all looked at him, but there were no men. But he moved slowly. We told him that he needed to move faster. The Germans had tactics. The tank was stopped, set fire to, and smashed. Then they launched fragmentation shells around the tank to beat the crew out. A tank can be built in 1 to 2 days, but the crew needs to be trained for 2 years, and it has to go through at least 5 to 10 attacks. So I jumped out of the tank, and Leonya climbed out of the tank slowly. His type of nervous system was different. I look. The tiger has fired at him, and a shell is flying straight towards him. The front and rear parts of the shell are blurred. And Leonya apparently saw that the shell was flying. He froze. He was standing in the hatch. He should have dived down back into the tank or jumped out. And the shell hit him right in the forehead. Death was instantaneous, of course. He sank down. Then the German lowered the sight. He thought that Leonya had managed to get back into the tank, and began to fire on that part of the tank where Leonya had fallen. The German hit plumb on the cartridges. The cartridges caught fire. The gunpowder caught fire. There was a crackling. The smoke was coming out. I am lying about 3 meters from the tank. Well, when the Germans saw that the mechanic driver was down, that the 2 of us alive had jumped out, the company commander had run somewhere, the Germans began to pump the shells. So when a shell goes over you, or from the side, it goes with a roar, with such a low-frequency roar, probably 50 to 100 hertz. The speed of the German shell from the Tiger and Panther is 100 meters per second. Since the Germans were 100 to 150 meters away from us, you can count that this is only 1/10 of a second. And the speed of sound is 330 meters per second. But when a shell goes exactly towards you, the sound is not heard. But there are some physical vibrations when there is a shock wave in front of a flying shell, and it makes a sound. Something like that. We knew that. When I felt that foo was coming, I immediately threw my body half a meter aside. I couldn't have gone faster. Near me, there is a shell flying like this. I tensed and realized that now it would explode, and nothing would be left of me. The shell began to descend at my right side, 20 to 30 centimeters away. It's coming down, and I see the front part of it is polished. Behind it, there are rough marks from a cutter, a copper driving band with grooves from a German gun, and a nose fuse sticks out in front. A little white rod, 6 millimeters in diameter, 15 millimeters long. The shell is descending to the ground. The nose fuse begins to enter. It has entered. I see that on the shell, there begin to appear longitudinal uneven cracks. First they are black, then they begin to expand. I realized that I was about to be torn apart. I strained my brain so much that the release of the electric field was so great that the shell did not burst into pieces, it floated into pieces, and my field around the brain was spherical. And the shell went along the line where the field strength was lowest, and all the fragments went higher, over me. I lost consciousness from the strain. After a couple of seconds, I came back to myself and looked. At my side there is such a ground funnel, black, 10 to 15 centimeters in diameter and 5 centimeters deep. There is no shell, but TNT has burned out, detonated. Therefore, the funnel around it is covered with the black soot of burnt TNT. I raise my eyes. I see, behind the left continuous track, Kostya is lying, looking at me inquiringly. I then realized that the exertion in the brain can be so great, and the intensity of the electric field can be so great, that time stops. This path, it is physical, it is unchangeable. But time stretches, it becomes long. For example, if it is 5 seconds, then the speed drops sharply. Therefore, I saw a falling shell. I saw how it was exploding. This is what I saw. This is the first time that I realized that the course of time can change. I tried to tell this fact to my younger son-in-law. Lieutenant Colonel of the artillery. He knew guns and shells very well, better than me by 100 times. He turned to me and said, "Vladimir Ivanovich, this cannot be so." I immediately shut up, turned the conversation to another theme. The second time, I tried to tell this fact to the Colonel of Artillery from the Dzerzhinsky Artillery Academy in Moscow, the brother of my friend Kostya. I also began to talk about the change in time, about the fact that the shell could be grabbed with the hands. He said nothing, just looked at me. I understood in his eyes total disbelief. I immediately cut off the story, turned the conversation to another theme, and I didn't tell it to anyone else. I'm telling you now only because you asked me a question about changing the course of time. It turns out that the path in space, I don't know if space is quantized or not, it is unchangeable, but time can be stretched or compressed. This case I have told you about is the shortest. The second case is more serious. My story is like the one of Baron Munchausen. This is a German fairy tale about a German artilleryman, Baron Munchausen, who served in the Russian army. The true Baron took part in the Russian-Turkish War of 1878, where my grandfather took part. This fictional story says that this Baron jumped onto a Russian shell, as if onto the back of a horse, flew into Turkish territory, examined everything from above, then jumped onto a Turkish shell, landed on Russian territory, and told the headquarters officers everything. This, of course, looks like a fairy tale in the 19th and 20th centuries. But if we consider that the course of time can be stretched or compressed, then this is not quite a fairy tale. That is, the Baron could lie as he liked, but for me, before you and before death, there is nothing to lie about. I, by the way, heard stories from frontline guys who said the same thing. When the shell fell nearby, it cracked. The black winding cracks expanded. The soldier looked at the shell with horror. Then the red color began to appear. The cracks expanded. The soldier lost consciousness because of tension and remained alive. He was not torn to shreds. I heard it twice back in the time of the war, the same stories. I don't know the nature of the electric field. It seems to me that this is an electrostatic field. When I read the last physics textbook, which students now use in school, it says that there are three types of fields: electromagnetic, gravitational, a weak interaction field between electron and nucleus, and a field with strong interaction inside the nucleus between protons and neutrons. And for some reason, the electrostatic field is missing there. I don't know why this is so, but you probably know that there is a stingray in the River Nile in Egypt. In conditions of muddy water, it does not see the fish, but by means of its emissions, it senses it, and then it emits an electric charge and kills the fish at a distance of half a meter. Moreover, this is in the water, and water, as is known, is a conductor of electricity. This means that the stingray has some kind of powerful field. Obviously, it does not have a magnet in its head, so there is no magnetic field according to the rule of the right hand or the rule of the left hand. Remember at school, there was a way of detecting the movement of a conductor in the field. So the physics of the process of changing the course of time began to interest me after the fact about which I'm going to tell you now. I used to believe mathematicians who said that speed is the first derivative of distance with respect to time dt. That acceleration is the first derivative of velocity with respect to time dt. This, for me, was kind of true. But when I compare the facts that happened with my brain, I can say that it's not at all obvious that time can be variable. I will continue my story. We took our position in the village of Krasnoye on the 19th in the daytime. The last battle with the Petergov-Streletsky German group was in the village of Ruska Vysotskaya on the night of January the 19th, 20th, 1944. The most difficult battle for both sides. This is the upcoming battle. From the west, a huge 2-kilometer column of Germans with an artillery regiment and headquarters enters Rusko-Vysotskaya. There were both Finnish and German troops, and from the north of the village of Krasnaya, our 260th Breakthrough Tank Regiment entered Rusko-Vysotskaya. Head to head we collided. This was the beginning of the whole commotion. The first shell, which the Germans had placed on the road, broke the anti-aircraft gun. The driver of the passenger car Horch, in which the German general was traveling, got scared, and the car buried its nose in the ditch and drove off the road. They were supposed to break through Rusko-Vysotskaya to the east, to Skvoritsi, and from Skvoritsi to Gatchina, where a large group of Germans were stationed, and from where they were inflicting strikes on Leningrad. We opened fire. The Germans stopped. But I should tell you that they were brave people. Seeing the hopelessness of the situation, they rolled out the anti-tank gun about 7 meters from our KV tank, set it up. Indeed, they did not turn turtle. The machine gunner began to fire at our viewing slots, my sighting window. The driver mechanic's triplex was broken. We immediately replaced the triplex with a new one. I took down this gunner. I shot at him 2 cartridges. But the German gun managed to fire 2 shots at us. With the first shot, the Germans broke the left track. I heard a short thumping sound, and then a melodic tinkling of the track, which was rolling over the support rollers, and part of it fell to the ground. And I realized that we had lost our going, and everyone realized this. Kostya, the gun commander, saw a flash 7 meters away, and he began to aim the turret according to the course and height. It took him probably about 5 seconds. He aimed it, but he didn't make it in time to fire. I heard a second short thump on the lower part of the frontal armor. I realized that the second shell had hit the armor. They fired with armor-piercing thermite shells. That is, this shell does not have explosives inside, but has a thermite cylinder. In the thermite, the combustion temperature is about 3000 degrees. I heard it and understood that now it would be bad. Right there was a fuel tank. I tensed as hard as I could. The shell managed to cover the distance to the tank. With the lower part, it made a hole of about 150 millimeters by 100. Fuel poured into the tank, and then the following happened. My brain created such a strong electrostatic field, or gravitational field. It looks like a gravitational one. And then the shell began to turn. It damaged 5 armor-piercing shells. And it went along an arc. It began to search for my brain. There were 3 people. The company commander was on the right. The loading tank commander was behind the turret gun. The gun commander was on the left. And the shell did not hit any of them. The shell went past them. It looked for my brain, my head. It moved past. It cut off the electric cable of the battery, and it poked me here. Now I have a small dent in the shoulder bone. I felt mechanical pain, but there was no pain. Later I realized that when you are wounded, you do not feel pain for a few seconds. So when the shell poked its nose into my shoulder bent. The release of the gravitational or electrostatic field was so great that the shell rose vertically. It began to look for my brain. It found it here and went past. Here I had a helmet. The shell touched the aluminium cover of the helmet and went past me. But it did not want to go, because the brain is here, and it almost stopped. Free fall acceleration exists in nature. I understand that. But the shell did not fall. It was next to my temple, and it was rotating. The rotation speed is approximately 1 to 2 revolutions per second. The forward speed was about 20 centimeters per second. Because I managed to remove my hands, which were at that moment on the light machine gun, off the light machine gun, grab the shell. With my left hand I grabbed the nose. It was smooth, polished. And with my right hand I grabbed it around the copper band of the obturating ring. On the copper band there were inclined grooves from the rifling of the German gun barrel. I grabbed the shell with all my strength, and I felt how these grooves cut my skin, ripped it off to the meat. I was holding it tight, and it was rotating. I wanted to get it down, and it went down slowly. It brushed against the front armor plate. It made a hole there. I looked after the battle. It was 6 millimeters in diameter, 4 centimeters deep, and there was a stream of burning thermite coming out of the shell, which was 30 centimeters long, 4 centimeters in diameter. Then it was expanding and contracting. The stream of thermite was not even, but pulsating. I managed to grab the shell, threw it down at my feet, and it continued to rotate. The number of movements it had was so high that it was rotating. I clamped down on it with my feet, and it crunched on the floor. So it was like that. Now I must tell you that the total length of the trajectory inside the tank was 3 meters. This distance the shell traveled for about 2 minutes, from the start of the breakthrough until it came to my temple, and ran into the front armor plate, which was probably 20 centimeters from my head. Well, they can say that my reaction was overly high. I was overwhelmed, that I could have moved my hands quickly and grabbed it. In order for the brain to give a command to the hands, it takes 5/100ths of a second, or 1/10 of a second. While my hands were reaching, while they acted, grabbed, a long time passed. You know there is such a thing as an hourglass, right? And in the physiotherapy rooms, even now, the time of the procedures is measured by the hourglass, right? For me, the hole in the fuel tank served as an hourglass. The fuel tank had 600 liters capacity. 600 liters are 3 vats. The fuel tank is designed for 300 kilometers. So when there was a hole, I heard the gurgling out of gas oil. Glug, glug, glug. Why so? Because there was no slot at the top. There was a plug, and it was like this. The air went into the tank. Then another portion of gas oil spilled out. Then again the air went into the tank. Again another portion spilled out. And so when the shell was thrown by me on the floor, the gas oil was up to my knees, i.e., This resulted in approximately 400 liters. 400 liters ran out, for example, every 3 seconds. 400 multiplied by 3, that's 1,200 seconds, which means about 3 minutes. The shell covered this path of 3 or 3.5 meters in 3 minutes. And thanks to this fuel tank, I understood all this when it was gurgling out. You know, when you pour the water out of a bottle, you remember how it gurgles. Glug, glug, glug. This is how the gas oil flowed out. Therefore, I concluded that this was not my overreaction, but it was a stop in time. I still remember the rotation speed, about 1 to 2 revolutions per second. Knowing the length of the barrel and the angle of inclination of the rifling, it's possible to determine what the rotational speed is. And I have just explained to you the change in the course of time. The colonel and lieutenant colonel did not believe me. I didn't tell, but I feel that I don't have much time left to live. For a war veteran who started in June 1941 and finished in March 1945, to live up to 90, this is a chimerical thing to live for so long. But before I die, I will tell you this fact. This is a subject for pondering, first of all for physiologists, those who study the human nervous system, and for physicists who study the dependence of space, time, and speed. Albert Einstein, a great physicist, had some thoughts on this, but he did not claim that time could change. And I told you that I twice felt this on myself. In addition, 2 frontline soldiers told me about the fallen shells, how the burst began. This is where I will end. I didn't finish telling you about the whole attack. It's a very long story and not easy. We were left in the attack together, Kostya and I. We then repulsed 11 attacks at night. We fired point blank at the column of fleeing enemies, Finns and Germans. You see, when human body parts fall, meat is lying around, blood, journalists say that these are naturalistic scenes. Therefore, they are not for a wide range of people. It's not customary in your environment to describe such horrors. But if it's still needed, then probably I will record it before death. When the second shell entered the tank, it hit the mechanic driver in the right hand, and the tank was in absolute darkness. 12 a.m., low clouds. There was a steel box. So, there is such an effect of Dr. Krakhaliev, according to which the human eye can emit photons of light and, like a radar, illuminate the surface where the eye is looking. Then the reflected rays go into the eye, go to the back of the brain, and the person sees at night. So, in complete darkness, I saw how the mechanic driver raised his hand slowly. It was torn off here. It hung on the skin, and a stream of arterial blood gushed from there. Arterial blood gushes in spurts. Then I heard him wheeze. It was some kind of shell fragment that had struck his throat and apparently pierced the vessel, carotid artery, and blood poured into his windpipe, and he began to wheeze. When this whole process ended in 3 to 4 minutes, the company commander from above, from the turret compartment, grabbed the mechanic by the shoulders. He had heard him wheezing, dragged him into the turret compartment. Together with the company commander, they first pulled him to the rear part. They jumped out themselves, took him by the arms, and carried him to the nearby tank. Our tank was hit. It did not move. There were 2 of us left in the tank. But at this time, the German artillery regiment hit the tank regiment. We were about 15 or 20 meters from the main column. 36 guns were firing. They were like non-stop fountains. And after that, I didn't see the guys anymore. I think that the company commander who stood and handed the wounded mechanic driver to the tank commander was probably simply riddled. After that, I saw the tank commander once, but I didn't see the mechanic driver. Well, if the carotid artery is punctured, then it is death. So we were left alone. We managed to pull the track together and gave the tank a run. Tank designer J.Y. Kotin was a wonderful designer. When our battery was broken and the cables were torn off, there was nothing to start the starter with. And Kotin provided a compressed air balloon at the level of my head. And we opened the balloon, started the diesel engine with compressed air, and could pull the track. In order to tighten the track, to put on the track, the tank had to be moved. That is, it was necessary first to move, and then put on the track. How the 2 of us managed to find the strength to put it on the track, I still don't know. Such incredible power appeared. Together we assembled the broken track. Together we repulsed 11 counterattacks. We repulsed the 12th counterattack together in the daytime. This is how the battle capability of the tank was preserved. From the story, you can see that there were 2 of us left. Twice we were in a situation where there were 2 of us left. He was such a great man. He was my age, born in 1922. He was a maths teacher. He had a mathematical mind. He evaluated everything that happened from the point of view of mathematics, looked for the most suitable optimal solutions, error-free solutions. And the company commander was also a maths teacher, but this is another theme.
Кто у вас был в роду? Кто эти люди? Как так получилось, что у вас такие способности стали?
You understand? It was the need for an immediate, quick reaction, immediate mobilization. When the shell hit me in the shoulder, I didn't feel pain. After that, I worked for 10 hours. I worked like a healthy man. And when the battle ended, when we had killed the Germans, my hand hung like a whip. After 10 hours, I could not move my hand. There was such tension that only the brain could create. Why did it happen? Well, my grandfather took part in the battles against Turkey. This is 1878, 1879. Probably it was not easy for them there. There was no weaponry equipment there, only Berdan rifles. This is a smoothbore weapon. There were shashkas, pikes. And my father, from 1914 to 1917, also had to fight against the Germans on the southwestern front in the 8th Army of General A.A. Brusilov. They defeated the army and pushed it to Galicia, to the Carpathians. And the Germans, in order to save the situation, the German divisions were sent to Galicia. And in order to stop the Russian troops, they used a chlorine attack. Chlorine was such a yellow-green cloud, about 3 meters high above the ground. It's heavier than air. As my father said, whoever ended up in it, he immediately fell. There he endured a chlorine attack. His brain figured out the following. He climbed a tree 5 to 6 meters high. He breathed chlorine there, but survived. After the Civil War ended, the collapse of the Russian army occurred. Kerensky is to blame for this, and Tsar Nikolai II, who was a useless emperor. Then whole regiments began to leave the front. And my father, at the end of 1917, after the revolution, went home with weapons together with his comrades. He came back home, and the interventionists in Central Russia, these are the British, French, Germans, began the occupation. First, the Germans occupied Ukraine, the Don, part of the Kuban, and entered the Caucasus region for oil. Then, when the revolution broke out in Germany in November 1918, the Germans left for Germany. They were replaced by the British and the French. The Civil War began not with the fact that our fathers began a massacre, but because foreign troops came and it was necessary to fight back. And my father had to fight with a rifle from 1917 until 1922. Therefore, there must have been some genetic changes in my entire generation, because all the men had such a fate. My father, however, did not live long. After all, the chlorine finished him off. He died in 1924. He breathed chlorine in 1915 and lasted a long time. He lasted for 10 years, and then the chlorine finished him off. He probably gave me a good genotype, because I've never been addicted to alcohol. I've never smoked. This helped me to hold on for a long time and live a very long time. In our tank regiment, the technical staff, these are repairmen, the artillery service, the staff officers smoked. And we, of course, never smoked or drank. Well, for example, when the battle in Rusko-Vysotskaya ended, we repulsed the final 12th attack in the afternoon. The Germans stopped rushing at us. Kostya and I got out of the tank, and we saw that we had smashed a German truck, and in it there were boxes with French cognac, rosy apples in January, canned food, light green barrels with schnapps, 150 liters each. We did not take a single bottle of cognac. We took only a box of Dutch butter, 20 kilograms, a box of French apples, 100 kilograms, canned food, dry bread. The Germans had been preparing for war since 1929. I read on the package of a loaf of bread. It was wrapped in paper covered in paraffin. The mark was 1929. That's when they began to prepare for war. We didn't take a single gram of cognac. But when the infantry came after us, first order of business, everyone went for the cognac, the schnapps, and after 20 minutes, everyone was lying horizontally. The experience of the war has shown that you don't need to take anything like that, but you need to take shells, ammunition, and cartridges. This is how Kostya and I survived together.